Well, good afternoon. We're sorry for the delay. We're going to try a makeshift transmission. If the sound and the quality doesn't work yet, there's some testing, then we will just adjourn the meeting and reschedule for tomorrow morning. Suspend it and reschedule for tomorrow morning. With that, we'll start the meeting. The roll call. Mr. Grant?
Present.
Mr. Hawkins? Mr. Ames?
Present.
Ms. Becker? Gotcha. Mr. Lennox?
Present.
And Mr. Stanford? Christian, are we in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we are. Thank you.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I need the approval of the agenda. Motion to approve it. Ms. Hawkins, any second? Need a second? Ms. Becker, thank you. Roll call for the agenda. Mr. Grant? Raise his hand.
Yeah, I'd say.
Mr. Hawkins? Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Ms. Becker? Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
And Mr. Stanford. Good. And myself. I just have a couple of remarks. In fact, more than a couple, so be patient with me. Before we go into the actual.
Direct yourself towards the microphone as best you can.
Okay. Yes, we're all afraid. The virus has and will change our life forever. But we will not lose sight of our neighbors' civil rights. Legal counsel has advised us of the law. We have heard from both sides and are bound by the law. The hospitality industry has agreed to go beyond the legal executive order put forth by the governor. They pledge no more reservations for arrivals during the extension of or new emergency declarations by the governor. This ordinance is in concert with the CDC domestic travel advisory, as well as the governor's ordinance restricting travel from hotspots. Council decisions are often pivoted on assessments of public safety, cost, and enforcement. These trying circumstances are no different, but they feel different because we are accustomed to debates of cost and benefits of speed limits, safety belts, building codes, but not this pandemic, which has no precedent for reach or scale. Coupled with the lack of global preparation, our state constitution, governor's emergency powers, lack of enforcement and new information, council is making a decision as it believes is best for the community at this time. There is no perfect answer. Please stay at home. If you're thinking of coming here, please don't. Now is not the time for you to visit our island home. We are closed, our beaches are closed. If you are planning to visit your second home, please don't. It's time for us all to come together. But if you would have thought, what will our new society look like? With that, I need a motion for the consideration of the ordinance. Ms. Hawkins,
Please unmute yourself.
Bill, unmute.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. To approve the adoption of the 20-10 with the addition of the following paragraph to be inserted at the bottom of page 2. Whereas the town council would also like to recognize and commend those businesses on the island, to include its restaurateurs, retail shops, amusement vendors, outdoor adventurers, healthcare workers, and law enforcement, and other such organizations that are a critical part of our local community, and recognize the significant sacrifices that many of them are making in support of the COVID-19 response efforts.
Do I have a second? Need a second. Do I have a second? Mr. Grant, thank you. Okay, discussion on it, Mr. Grant?
Well, I thank you for the clarity in terms of the resolution, but I acknowledge, thank you also for giving us a definition of where we made some missteps in terms of our present ordinance. But just like you just said, that we have to follow the laws of our state. So in saying that, I'm pretty much done in terms of what I need to say.
Thank you. Mr. Hawkins?
No, I support the direction and the narrative of the mayor in advance of this motion, and it sets forth clearly where we are and why we have to move forward.
Mr. Ames?
Are we voting on Mr. Harkins' motion or on the entire motion at this moment?
Entire motion with Mr. Hawkins' amendment.
Mr. Harkins, move to approve with this addition, so we don't need a second. We're voting on the whole thing as with that inserted.
I'd like to assure the people who have counted on me in the past that I've given this matter long and serious thought, because the pandemic is such a grave threat. But with only the information and data that's available, I've made a decision. Without true enforcement, the ordinance is a feat and only a statement of hope. I share that hope and wish we could enforce the ordinance. I'm voting in favor of the motion.
Ms. Becker? Oh.
What am I doing here? Okay.
Okay, you're good.
So I'd like to just start by getting some clarification from Curtis, if I can. I'm still unclear as I pull both our ordinance from April 7th and the governor's ordinance from April 8th. No, April 3rd. Sorry, it's April 3rd. Other than under number 6 of our ordinance, where else? Number 6, the controversial 61 days, and the letter B, which goes on to say, or the expiration of the state of emergency, dated March 16th. Other than those two places in our ordinance, where are we afoul with the law? Where are we not in compliance with the governor's law?
At this point, I mean, obviously you're asking me for a legal interpretation of this, which I'm happy to do. However, the privilege out there belongs to council. And so if council wants to have me do this, then I'm happy to do it. But council needs to affirm that it wants me to do this.
Well, I can make it pretty easy from my standpoint, because I have a statement. But those are the two areas, and correct me if I'm wrong, that I see that we're not in compliance with the governor's order from April 3rd. And I have no issue whatsoever with clarifying anyone concerned with the arbitrary nature of the 61 days of our ordinance from April 7th and removing it and restating the letter B under that section that would, instead of using the state of emergency of March 16th, which I believe is our mayor's state of emergency, that we clarify and make it consistent with the governor's state of emergency from, I believe, March 13th. Those two things I have no problem with at all. And I have no issue with amending that April 7th ordinance to be consistent with the governor's order regarding that time frame. It frankly makes sense. And personally, if I had been advised of the possibility of all these issues coming from it, I would have cleaned it up last Tuesday before voting to approve it. And I appreciate that the rental agencies, on their own initiative, sent early on to council a statement of willingness to cooperate in a meaningful way on rental reservations, and even to their credit extended the time. I would like to highlight that that is, from my understanding, 19 of the rental agencies. And so that still leaves us with many out there who haven't made that commitment that I'm concerned about. I regret that a full conversation, quite frankly, with the rental agencies was not undertaken before council and the rental agency groups so that we could have reached an agreement on a variety of topics of significant concerns to our residents. I think that would have been helpful. I think it absolutely needs to be on the list of things that we look to the future to put into place. God forbid we ever find ourselves in this situation again. But some of those concerns I just want to talk about, because in conversations that I've had with some of the rental agencies, I've asked them specifically with regards to hotspots. And the governor's order speaks to hotspots. Of course, I'm not going to. And it not only says hotspots as it is in the, as listed on the CDC's webpage, but it also talks about other extensive areas of infection that exist. It says under its letter B, or other geographic areas subject to or identified in a CDC travel advisory or other CDC notice as a location with extensive community transmission of COVID-19, to include the tri-state area up north. So I asked the agencies, how do you monitor that? What is your policy? What is the procedure? When someone calls you and they're asking for a reservation, how do you know what question to ask them to be in compliance, not with the Hilton Head's ordinance, but with the governor's ordinance, with regard to those hotspots or those extensive areas of community transmission? And there's really not a good answer for that. But moreover, the question is, how do you know, because it's a fluid list, it's a moving target, how do you know that when their arrival date comes, that their city or town isn't now part of that group that the governor listed? And what do you do if it is? And how do you know that if they're coming from someplace that's not on the list the day they make the reservation or the day that they arrive, that they haven't traveled through one of those areas? All of these issues have not been and should have been discussed so that a policy and a procedure could be consistently put in place. It's not my job to comply with that. It's the rental agency's job to comply with the governor's order. And I want to know from them how they do that, because how they do that, how they ensure us that their renters are coming from places that aren't on those lists, keeps our folks here on the island safe. And so I have a concern about that. I have a concern about the housekeeping staff. And I ask this question: who provides the housekeeping staff with the well-recognized and recommended protection equipment necessary, i.e. gloves, masks, coveralls, shoe covers? Who makes sure that they keep the housekeeping staff safe and that they, when entering a home or a villa, a property, to clean it, aren't being exposed to the possibility of a virus germ that's been left behind? Who then picks it up and takes it back to their residents, to their families? Some of our most vulnerable population, many of whom don't have health insurance. Who makes sure that when they go to the grocery store, they don't drop it there? And then for the next step, who makes sure that the next person walking into that rental doesn't pick it up? The housekeeping staff are our islanders for the most part, and they work here, and they're our neighbors and our friends. And just tell me, what are the safety protocols that are in place to protect them? Who is supplying and paying for these extras? Keep in mind, most of these folks are people who are making minimum wage. Who's paying for that? Who's sitting afar in their safe homes and suggesting that locals do not interfere with any of their business from their cash cow properties here on the island and keeping us safe? A few months ago, everyone was concerned about how we would find ways to have as many service industry individuals live on the island, conveniently located, because we needed housekeepers and lawn maintenance and hospitality servers as part of our community. We wanted them as part of our community, outside the gates, of course. Well, how do we do that? How do we protect them? How do we include them in times of trouble? Do we not ask these questions? I think they're important questions. My job as a representative of residents on the island is to keep them safe. I have not heard any protocols, any policies, any procedures, any way to certify that any of this is taking place and it's being monitored. We talk about enforcement. How is it that the governor's order is being enforced with these concerns? And I'll move on. I get it. We passed unanimously an ordinance that folks are angry about. They can't make their money. They can't pay for their kids' private education. They can't support their retirement plans. They can't pay their mortgages, their bills, their taxes, and support their lifestyles that they lead because of their cash cow income properties on Hilton Head Island. And that we have temporarily limited that so that we could save human life from the exposure to a deadly virus. And somehow that warrants massive threats of lawsuits against the town. I get it. This singular group of business property owners is the only one that I've heard of who have been asked to share in the sacrifices that has resulted in those massive lawsuit threats. And now we are informed that our ordinance may fall short legally should they indeed sue us. This group has joined together and rallied all force against the town they profess to love and enlisted their chamber to go to bat for them. And that influence won. And the safety of our island residents is no better for it. So to everyone who thinks their vote on an ordinance that doesn't address the issues that I've brought up here, which is only just a few, serves our community, or should I say saves the community from a financial exposure from these threatened lawsuits, threatened by those concerned about lining their pockets, I will submit to you that indeed it very well may prevent our exposure to those lawsuits. It also might, however, and most importantly to me, in my opinion, threaten the lives of the islander paradise and residents that we represent, that are our neighbors and our friends, and our coworkers. I find this all to be quite ironic, as our new comp plan currently being put together extols the virtues of Hilton Head Island as an island of excellence and high standards and best in class. Well, as my grandmother would have said, that just might be a bunch of malarkey. My job here is to say that I want to be in agreement with the governor's order with regard to the dates, with regard to whose executive emergency order is the one that could undo all these ordinances. I want to be in agreement with that. And I also want to keep our neighbors safe. And I can't do that without these questions having been answered. So I'm torn. I'm really torn. The residents of this island, in my mind, come first. So I'm going to move on. I'm not sure, are we taking a vote now, or are we just discussing this? I can't hear you.
Just discussing it, Tammy.
Okay. Well, those are the things I'd like to leave folks with to think about. And that's why I asked Curtis what it was that, where else are we not in compliance? Because I would say I don't understand why we're not just amending our ordinance to be consistent with the governor with regard to the time. I have nothing, I'm not in love with the 61 days. I could care less about it. The ordinance could be completely done away with by the governor's removal of the state of emergency. And I'm perfectly fine with that. And I'm perfectly fine with working with the rental community and all of the businesses on the island. And I thank Bill for adding that whereas to the ordinance, because when I read the ordinance, what I see is a lot of PR and for the rental agencies, which in a normal day, I'm happy to support every business on this island. But we have had a backlash of threats and lawsuits and absurd comments. And then to add all of the exfoliating, all of the famous accommodations, etc., into the ordinance. The ordinance can be real simple. Make it real clean. It's the law, whatever it is. We don't need to tell everybody how wonderful they were when they just finished for the last 3 days threatening to sue the town. I can't imagine how that sits with anyone, but it doesn't sit well with me.
Okay, now, Mr. Lennox?
I'm done.
Thank you, John. This is tough. My considerations in recommending public policy in a situation like this, in an emergency like this, really are three. First, how best to assure public safety. Second, how can I protect property owners' rights? And third, how can I minimize any overall economic and financial impact on residents? In a best case scenario, these considerations never come in conflict with each other. However, in this instance, they appear to have. I think the consideration, the work of the council, the recommendations of town lawyers are pointed in the right direction. And I think that ultimately we will be better off after initiating an ordinance such as this. I can't add anything more to that, John.
No.
Glenn?
Yes. From my point of view, this ordinance was adopted in an effort to protect public safety, the people that live on this island, and to help keep away the people who should be sheltering in place. Public safety was paramount in my mind. However, I am advised that the power to execute such a thing is reserved to the state once the governor has executed his executive order. So regrettably, I find myself necessary to support this motion. Thank you.
Okay, the vote now. Mr. Grant?
I support.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Ms. Becker? Ms. Becker? Becky, you might, okay.
Yeah, no, I got it. I don't want it to be misconstrued. I absolutely want to support and be in alignment with the governor's ordinance order from April 3rd. But because of all the considerations that we have not yet discussed, I would prefer to amend ours and move forward so that we have something of our own as a statement for our public, for our residents. And so for that reason, I'm going to say no.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Mr. Stanford?
Yes.
John McCann, yes. Motion passes 6-1. Do any of the council members think we need comment tonight? Mark, yes, Mark.
Yes. I just wanted to say some certain things. One, as a town, 90% of our citizens are acting responsibly during this pandemic crisis. They're following social distancing. They are respecting one another in terms of washing their hands. And I think our hospitals are doing an excellent job in terms of addressing the needs of our community. I think as we move forward, though, we need to be mindful of the role that we play in terms of the town. And we did that. We closed the public access to the beach. We closed the parks. We closed non-essential businesses. And as I drive around the island certain times of the day and night, I notice very few people on the island, very few people moving around. And even at the last meeting, Councilman Tom Lennox communicated that how the real estate market in terms of short-term rental is at its lowest ever in a long time. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I just ask and encourage all of us to create laws that we have control and empowered to follow through on, such as the mayor communicating to people in his constituents and friends from home in New York to please stay in New York until this epidemic is over. I also recognize, too, that Councilman Tom Lennox communicated to his family and friends in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the same message. So we are doing our due diligence to address this pandemic. And we have power to create an environment that keeps our people safe. So I encourage us to, let's continue to stay creative, continue to stay positive. And hopefully this crisis will pass as quickly as possible and go back to our daily life as usual. But I thank you for your time. Yeah.
Hawkins, any comments?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I think it's imperative that we as a town continue to work with numerous media outlets and share to the public that we are still in a period of high risk and high incidence activity, and yes, in a period too of rising mortality. And we have to share that with the public very clearly, let them know we love them, but we don't want them here right now. And then going forward, I think we need to have a very concerted process with leadership in the rental community and ourselves to review policies and procedures that could reflect a much improved best practice. And God forbid we ever have a situation like this again. Thank you.
Ms. Ames?
I have no further comments.
Thank you. Ms. Becker?
Hi. So Mark, that was extremely well said. And I appreciate you and Bill and what I've heard so far. I have a question as to moving forward. We're in the midst of this now. I understand that. I don't really think it takes a whole lot of our energy in terms of anything we're doing not to be able to convene sooner rather than later to start putting together an outline of where we go from here and begin to set some of those meetings and conference workshops in place so that the shortfalls that we have had through this emergency can be addressed as a priority for this town. We talk about us getting through this and that hopefully it won't occur, and absolutely we pray every day that it won't occur again. But the idea of it reoccurring in short order also exists. And so I think we need to be ready and prepared sooner rather than later. And so to ask that that be put on the priority list. Thank you.
Mr. Lennox? I meant that seriously.
I have nothing to add, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Stanford?
I support the idea of reviewing our rules and regulations dealing with rental properties, starting with business licenses and who should be required to have business licenses. I think that it is time for us to review the ATAX rules and regulations, and particularly who is governed by those regulations and who is paying the tax, and enforce that strictly as an additional matter to provide input to the town and information about who is here renting properties. There are no doubt many other measures that could be done, and so I support the notion that I think that Ms. Becker just made, and that is that it's time for us to give that matter a priority so that we can avoid, hopefully, God forbid this thing ever happen again. Thank you.
One more.
Hold on, you're on.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And Ms. Beckett, I really truly appreciate your comments, and I look forward to this council working together to resolve a lot of those issues. They're really good points, and we should move sooner than later. I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, Mr. Grant?
In favor?
Mr. Hawkins?
Aye.
Ms. Ames?
Aye.
Ms. Becker?
Yes.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford? Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much.